My name is Julian. I'm one of the lay ministers in the local churches in the Crickhowell area. I'd like to welcome you to our 5th magazine programme, the Telusk Forum, for everyone in the Usk Valley. You may be wondering why I'm dressed like this. Well, the 1st of June was a birthday, but sadly there's no birthday party yet being held this year. It's the 100th birthday of the church in Wales, when our first Archbishop, Alfred George Edwards, was enthroned at St Asaph Cathedral in North Wales. All our local churches were once part of the Church of England, but they were disestablished in 1920. It's a fascinating story, and it's far too long to talk about today. But a book has been published called A New History of the Church in Wales. I've already started reading through it, and if you're interested, you can order copies from Bookish. Our current Archbishop John has written the final chapter, looking at the Church of the future. Well, last week, Rana talked to us about his vision for the ministry area, so it's quite interesting to see what the Archbishop has to say about his priorities for the Welsh Church. Well, firstly, he takes the readers back to the Great Commission at the end of Matthew's Gospel, and he affirms that making disciples is still the key activity for the Church going forward. And he proposes that the yardstick by which the next 100 years should be judged is whether we have faithfully proclaimed the faith. Evangelism, which he sees as living as well as teaching the gospel, is the Church's primary task, with the Church as the servant of others. He also asks the question, is the Church in Wales a family of faithful Christians or a grouping of habitual churchgoers? An interesting question. In response, he affirms the need for the growth in discipleship and welcomes the training of diverse ordained and lay ministries through the work of the St Padarn's College and the Theology for Life training course. However, I need to move on to present the rest of our programme today. Yesterday morning, Alison interviewed Kerry about her work with young people. Vaughan will play us a waltz by Brahms. Then Helen will read one of her poems. And finally, I'll talk to Carl about the most common problem that he has to address as a GP at the moment, the problem of anxiety.
Good morning. Today I'm going to talk to Kerry, who leads the youth work in St Edmund's Church. Morning, Kerry. Happy birthday for yesterday.
Oh, thank you. Morning, Alison.
Kerry, I know that a while ago you recognised the need for a youth group in our church, and you started this one in rather an unusual way. Would you like to tell us about that?
Right. Yes, about 7 years ago, Jill Madley was doing a lot of work with the children, with a team of hers. And as they grew older, they seemed to, and when they were going off to high school, they didn't seem to have a club to go to. At the time, I was doing, and still doing bell ringing for the church, and a number of young people were coming through and ringing the bells on a regular basis, practicing and on Sundays. And at the time I had 3 young girls who were aged 10 and 11, so they were just transitioning into the high school. And I really felt for them. And I really felt a prompting, I believe it was from God, to do something more than just the bell ringing. And I wasn't sure, because I didn't think I was capable of running anything like that. So I had a chat with Jill and with Barry, our rector at the time, and I couldn't get rid of that feeling of needing to do something more. So I had a chat with the girls to see if they wanted to do something apart from bell ringing, and they were very keen. So we extended the sessions, and did some games and a story and some crafts, and they invited some friends along, and the group grew quite quickly to about 12 children within a few weeks. And we carried on with the bell ringing, and I acquired some handbells from Gilwyn Church, so I thought that would be fun to do as well. And they were all very enthusiastic about both types of bell ringing, so they decided to call themselves Totes Amaze Bells. So that's where the name came from. And so we carried on doing both, and carried on playing games and doing Bible games and Bible activities and crafts, and a story, and it sort of grew from there.
Good. So in normal times, when we're not in lockdown, you hold a weekly meeting, and that's for school year 6, so that's 10-year-olds up to what age?
About 15. So yes,
and you've continued with the bells?
Yes, we've carried on with the bells. We do the handbells mostly in the autumn term to practice for Christmas, and we still ring church bells, but it's about once a month now. The practice, as there's too many of them to go in the tower at once, and not all of them are so keen on the church bell ringing. So we have a games night on the same night as the church bell ringing, and we set up various games in the church building itself, and they go from one thing to another, pool and board games, drafts, that sort of thing. And just have time to chat with each other and with the leaders as well. It's a time for us to get to know them a bit better. And those that want to do the bell ringing, because they practice for Sundays and also ringing for weddings, so they still can practice on that once a month session.
Good. So that's in normal times. So are you managing to keep in contact with them during lockdown? And are you finding out how they're coping with it?
Yes, we decided to set up a WhatsApp group and a Zoom chat as well, both of them once a week on different days. And so we've been having a chat on the WhatsApp. We post different things to each other. Sometimes it's pictures or games to do, or we just exchange how we're getting on and what we're doing, that sort of thing. And with the Zoom chats once a week, where it's more of a chat really, and we're getting to know the children a bit better, some of them. Some seem to be coping quite well and quite active and getting on with their schoolwork. Others finding it quite a stress, trying to do the schoolwork online and at home, that sort of thing. And they're all really missing their friends an awful lot as well. So that's quite a challenge for them. And one of the things we've just started to do is, thinking about other people, is to write letters to some of the elderly folk that Sally and her team are engaging with as well. So hopefully they're managing to write their letters now, and I've had one or two already dropped in my door for posting on to them. So but they're all doing okay at the moment, but some more than others.
Well done for all those ways of keeping in contact. And I think some of them have said they're looking forward to coming back to club when it starts again.
Yes, they're all keen to come back again. And we look forward to doing all sorts of things when they're back. We're getting more ideas of what we can do. Been able to look at various resources, and I've already sent some of those resources out to them as well.
And I hear that there's some good news for when you start back. Well, was going to be the autumn, but might be delayed now.
Yes, last autumn we took most of the young people to Lee Abbey, which is a retreat centre in North Devon. And we had a great weekend doing all sorts of activities and got to know some of the tutors there, the instructors. And one of them became very interested in our youth group and contacted me afterwards. I had been just talking generally with them, saying that we need more youth work doing here because our numbers have been growing a lot lately. And we've also been praying as a group of youth leaders here for a paid youth worker to be employed through the church if possible. And anyway, this young man contacted me afterwards and said he'd be very interested to come and work here with us. So he came in January for a week to have a chat and meet the children, and he was very enthusiastically greeted by everybody, and we all got on really well. So the plan was that he would have started in September with us, but obviously plans have changed due to the lockdown, and we need to see the way forward really as to whether that's still what the plan will be when we come out of lockdown. So
yes, well, that's really something exciting to look forward to.
Yes, yeah, very exciting if it comes off. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you for introducing the youth work to us, and we'll continue to pray for you. And everybody's looking forward to getting back together when lockdown's over. Thank you, Kerry.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much.
Today I'd like to read you a poem about an old man who is towards the end of his life and reminiscing about happier times. Joe's harvest. Like wool snags on wire, limply waving remnants remind us of old life. His vest, thin, worn and past its best, yet clinging wind-blown to the line. Joe, old, not willing to let go. He works in the garden, and words are few, some for himself and some for friends with whom he shared a joke, a laugh, a loss, his life. His thick fingers are stiff now and knotted, with no real grip to dig. He digs, and turns the soil and plants the seed, backfills, treads down and waters it. Ready for a pint, he wanders in his mind to the plough. Best ale in the county then. No frills, just skittles, darts and doms. Now, it's twice cooked chips, fancy sticky things in dips. Loud sorts of people with money and time to play on phones with strange and unfamiliar rhymes. He takes a rich brown egg from under his favourite, the speckled lady. His small meal eaten, he pours himself a glass and raises it, remembering those for whom this too would have seemed a feast. His eyes close. He sees vividly the bee in the crimson foxglove, watches the delicate dance of spring blackbirds, and smells his mother's warm bread. The carrots will be fine next year, and Joe's harvest will be brought home.
Yeah, that's great.
So, hi, Carl. It's really good to see you again. And how are things going at the moment? How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, Julian. I hope you're keeping well. Yeah, enjoying the sunny weather and enjoying the garden and those things. So I'm just about, yeah, I'm holding my own, I feel.
Last time when we talked, we touched upon mental health during the crisis, and we said that we were going to look at ways that we can build resilience for coping with what is actually a very stressful time for many people. It seems a really big subject, and I wondered where you were thinking we could begin on that topic.
Well, I think when I was thinking about this, I thought if we did some background thinking first to get an idea of what the common mental health problems are and understanding them a little bit. And then maybe in future conversations, we could look at very practical ways in which we could build our strength up for you know, sort of combating these issues in our lives.
Okay, well, that sounds really good. Perhaps you could explain a little bit about what the common mental health issues are that you see as a GP, because you're seeing people every day, or at least hearing from them over the phone. What are those common issues that are coming up?
Well, I think the most common issue, without any doubt, is anxiety. And every time I have a surgery, there'll be at least 4 or 5 people on my list who will be wanting to speak to me about their anxieties and their fears about the situation that they're in. And so that's a really big issue, and it may be a big issue for people in our church family as well. And the main sensation in these anxiety conditions is fear. And it can range anything from a mild worry through a disabling anxiety to an outright panic attack, where people are severely frightened and unable to function even physically. And of course, most of us feel nervous at some stage. I mean, if we've had an interview or an exam, it's not a disease to feel anxious in a stressful situation. But if we begin to feel anxious in our normal life by things which are surrounding us all the time, then anxiety stops being useful to us, and it actually gets in the way. You know, it affects our ability to enjoy things. It mucks up our relationships, and that's really important now when we're locked down together and in close proximity together. It stops us concentrating, and we can't get things done. And it can give us all sorts of physical symptoms, and those things make us worry, and then we're getting into a vicious circle where we worry more, so we get more physical symptoms or inability to cope, and it can get quickly out of hand. So in normal life, we're designed to cope with stress in a number of ways. So if we see a lion in the distance, then you know, that is a stressful situation, and our body kicks into a physiological reaction straight away. It's a reflex. We don't have any control over it. So if something makes us anxious, immediately our nervous system will switch on certain things. Our muscles will become tense, and our blood vessels will dilate in the skin, will feel hot, and we may sweat a little bit, and adrenaline will pour into our blood, and our heart will beat, and we'll breathe more deeply and more quickly. And that's really good if we see a lion, you know, because either we're going to fight the lion, which is probably not a good idea, or we're going to run away from the lion. And we need these things to sort of get us out of that situation. But I think you can see that if there's no lion there, or if the lion goes, but we keep that sort of scenario going, that very quickly it causes all sorts of of difficult problems. And it's not only our bodies which are affected by anxiety and these reflexes, but our mind is the same. So when we're in a stressful situation, we might not realize it, but we become hypervigilant. So we begin to be very watchful, very jumpy. We're alert to all sorts of things. Time begins to slow down, and we overthink things. So we run little videos. What if the lion goes there? What if it goes over there? Maybe I should go there. And really quickly, we're running these videos through our mind. And they can take over, and they can block other thoughts, and they can sort of occupy our thinking all the time. And if you've struggled with anxiety, then you know what I mean. And people often say, in the nighttime when I want to go to sleep, I can't stop my mind whirring over, and all these videos are playing all the time, and I'm just thinking these things, and I can't stop. And that can be really distressing, and it means that people don't get off to sleep. Or if they do get off to sleep, they wake up at the slightest noise. Oh, is that a lion downstairs? And those things are a real problem. And of course, normally when we're away from the lion or the exam, we calm down and everything settles back to normal. And it may take us a while to recover from a nasty shock. I mean, we all know that experience, don't we? Where it may take hours for us to recover. But eventually we go back to the more normal way of living. But in chronic anxiety, the system just never gets switched off. And in COVID, where the virus is all around and we're listening to 24-hour news about it, it never seems to switch off. And so we feel this constant hypervigilance, jumpy, trembly, sweaty situation. We can't sleep, we can't enjoy our food, we can't enjoy our families, and it's an extremely difficult situation. It can make us sad, and people with anxiety, chronic anxiety, really get sad, and so we call that anxiety depression or anxiety depression, because they really commonly go together. And the sad thing about anxiety is that we don't really have good treatments for it. So it's very humbling as a doctor to say that, but we don't have tablets that really, really help anxiety for most people. It's not that type of disease. We normally say to people, well, avoid caffeine. So I think we all know that, don't we? That caffeine is a drug which switches on the same system that anxiety switches on. So if you're an anxious person and you've got a lot of anxiety in your system, taking caffeine really is a bad idea. And if you need to reduce it slowly because your body's used to it. But if you're anxious, then you should really try and avoid taking excessive caffeine. Some people may take beta blockers, stop that adrenaline effect. So you still feel frightened, but you don't get the pounding heart and the breathing issues. And some people find those really helpful. They could cope with the fearful thoughts as long as they're not getting the physical symptoms. And then some people use antidepressants. And I think a lot of people think that when they're given tablets by the doctor for their anxiodepression, that the tablet that they're given is for anxiety. But really, it's an antidepressant tablet, which makes them gets rid of the depression. And so they feel a bit stronger and they can cope with the anxious thoughts. But it's not really tackling the fear problem. Some people use alcohol. We don't recommend that because, of course, that has its own problems. Some people have heard of drugs like Valium, and they help for a short time, but they're addictive, so they have their own problems. So I suspect that the hard truth is the main way that we treat anxiety is just counselling and relaxation and talking things through with people, developing strategies to cope with these anxious thoughts, and cognitive behavioral therapy or just talking things through with a friend sometimes can really, really help. So if you've got a problem with anxiety, you can learn these techniques very easily. In fact, you can Google them, and you can just go on the internet and look at YouTube and relaxation therapies, and people will show you some exercises you can do. I suppose a lot of people know that when they get anxious, they feel that their breathing goes a bit fast. One relaxation therapy is to concentrate on your breathing, slow your breathing right down. And so you're feeding a calm message back into the system. The system's getting out of control with anxiety. But by focusing on your breathing, you're putting a calming message back into the system to try and switch it off. And it's the same with other things where you tense up your muscles and then you relax them. That's putting a calming message back into your system and helping you to take control. But it's not easy, and it's like practicing a musical instrument or learning a foreign language. You've got to do an awful lot of basic learning before you can master it. But once you master it, then when you get your panicky feelings, you can put it into practice. And also every day you can spend a bit of time meditating and relaxing and trying to get sort of the anxiety out of your system. I find that a lot of people don't like to hear that message, Julian. I have to say that when you tell them that we don't really have a good tablet for anxiety, they're really disappointed, and they certainly don't want to. This therapy seems so weak and so difficult for them. But it is the case that when you're mainly having fear symptoms, the treatment is mainly in the counselling area there.
So do you actually suffer from any anxiety yourself, Carl, or do you have anyone that you know well who has this problem?
Well, I think we all struggle with anxiety because it's not really a disease. So I do get stressed out. Sometimes work can be very stressful, and I'm actually very scared of heights. So that is very stressful for me. When we were flying back and forth to India, I would never sit in a window seat, for example. That's a phobia. Lots of people have phobias, and they're anxiety-based problems. And Sally gets anxious. He can be anxious, and so that is something which we have to cope with. I think it's very, very common, and that's why I thought it was important to tackle it quite early on. I was reading Matthew's Gospel this week, and in chapter 6 of Matthew, and people can read this if they're interested, Jesus talks a lot about worry, and he says it's not sufficiently trusting in God, and that makes a big difference to our worry. And he says, don't worry about things which you can't change. This is advice from Jesus, and it's really good advice. So he says, no one made themselves taller by worrying. Don't worry about so many things we worry about we can't do anything about. And Jesus says you're just building that worry into your life. And then don't worry about imaginary things. Or what'll happen tomorrow, or this might happen if that happens, that type of thing. Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow. Just concentrate on what you're going through now. And I was so impressed by, the simple wisdom that you can get from the Lord Jesus himself on helping with worry. And I've done a little study on hope, which is a bit of an antidote for worry. And I find, prayer and Bible study and memorizing Bible verses on a subject really helpful. And having some verses which I can, repeat to myself and think about on the subject of hope, that can be an antidote for worrying as well. So I think we all worry, Julian. I don't think it's just, some people have much bigger problem with it than others. But the Bible is full of instructions telling us not to fear. Fear not is a very common phrase in the Bible, and that's because fear is a very, very common worry that we have, a very common problem.
Thank you for that, Carl. It's great to have this next instalment, and I very much look forward to the next time that we meet. Thank you.